Hey y'all, it's pattheflip back with another essay reading. This time, I'll be reading How to Be a Good Sparring Partner while playing some good old Quake III Arena bot matches. I don't know if this will be quite as relaxing as the previous videos, but I find it relaxing to play, and if you have other recommendations for games to show in these videos, feel free to drop them in the comments. As always, if you would like to support my work, sign up at patreon.com/pattheflip. Paid subscribers get to ask me questions and help me pay bills, and free subs get everything I do delivered straight to your inbox. Thanks for listening. People who play fighting games are embarking on their own martial arts journey, but the games themselves don't provide the tools, people, concepts, or culture needed to sustain our health and motivation through that journey. I'm writing this essay to explain the concept of sparring and how it's distinct from serious competitive matches so that all players old and new can level up their learning mindset. The limits of fantasy. Fighting games are generally themed as martial arts fantasies. Street Fighter depicts the strongest world warriors fighting tournament matches to prove their strength, not in the controlled space of a gym or arena, but out in the world. When Street Fighter II blew up, the players got to have that same experience by challenging strangers in bars, corner stores, and laundromats for 25-cent money matches. The core game content, the characters, stages, and the world map with the airplane and the announcer, paired with the distribution model, coin-op arcade games, to create in players' minds the fantasy that for just a quarter or two, we can live out our own kung fu movie experience. Most people will play for a few minutes or an hour or maybe even a couple months, and that's enough. Some will decide that virtual fighting is not for them. Others will dip back into it from time to time, in the same way that they'll mix in Enter the 36 Chambers or Master of the Flying Guillotine into their Netflix routine. And some people, like you, since you're listening to this, will get a taste of this experience and find that it fits a need in their life that they didn't know they had. They have discovered a skill set within themselves that must be cultivated because it feeds their need to feel strong or smart or connected to others. For these people, the fighting game itself is good, but incomplete. The game provides the martial arts fantasy of epic fights, but the fantasy does not include the emotional struggle to overcome our insecurities and limitations. I can't do combos. Nor the thousands of hours required to train our brains and hands to perform complicated operations in fractions of a second, nor any other part of the real martial arts experience, except perhaps as a training montage sequence. And so the people who wanted to make fighting games more than just the fantasy have, over decades, built many of the things we needed outside the game itself in order to elevate our practice. We have training modes, tournaments, tech videos, and all kinds of other stuff that, frankly, real-life martial arts are not as good at. Fighting game net play is nowhere near as good as the real thing, but it's way better than trying to net play an actual physical sport. So what does it mean to be a good sparring partner? Well, people who play fighting games have many of the same tools and practices as actual martial artists, but we don't have many training environments that provide the value that martial arts training environments do. We don't have a strong student-to-teacher culture, so it is harder for people to learn. And we don't have many people who understand how emotionally nuanced our behavioral expectations must be in order to create a safe culture for virtual fighting, which means that people often catch needlessly harsh vibes. To me, nowhere is this more evident than when I see people who treat every casual match as an opportunity to go all out. It is because they don't know how to be a good sparring partner. When new martial artists are given a chance to hit each other for the first time, it often goes like this. They start out timidly pawing at each other because they're scared of hurting their partner. But each strike comes a little bit faster and a little bit harder until one of them lands something good. And then it escalates from there until by the end of the round, they're trying to take each other's heads off. This is why you do not let newbies spar unsupervised. This pattern happens because the two players are communicating through their attacks, but they're not good enough at it yet to understand how the conversation works, so they just start quiet and end up shouting. Over time, however, these two will become good sparring partners. They'll learn to modulate their efforts to their opponent's skill set and physical ability so that both partners can get something productive and even enjoyable out of punching each other's faces. They'll learn to use their words, not just their hands, to help guide the session into a good place. They know that the goal of sparring is not to beat the other person, but to practice. And in a good practice session, both players come out better than they started. In fighting games, we just call this playing casuals. But I see a lot of folks go into casuals with the same energy as EVO finals, and the games themselves rarely give us any useful tools or cues to dial it down. Instead, people think that they have to go 100% at all times against everyone, and that the only good matches that come out of this are with people who are at a similar skill level. The role of the stronger player. Once a sparring session starts, the first thing the players usually try to do is determine who is the better player. In martial arts, this is usually implicitly easy for both players to understand. Belt rank, height or weight, and length of time training are all reliable indicators for skill. So if a black belt is sparring with a white belt, it's pretty fair to assume that the black belt is the better player. This is important because the better player generally gets to dictate how the sparring match goes, kind of like being the lead in a partner dance. If I, as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, start sparring with someone who is relatively new to the sport, the skill imbalance will be big enough that I can execute almost any technique I want, end up in any position I want, and use the match to practice whatever I want, and my sparring partner's job is to deal with it as best they can. But if I am selfish in how I practice and use the matches entirely for my own purposes, then my partner will become bored or frustrated and will not stick with the sport for very long. So, the better player is responsible for the health and learning of both players in the match, and it's their job to use their power to guide the match into a place where both players get to practice something useful. For the weaker player in these matches, their job is simple: just try to win. Playing against more skilled players is an excellent chance to test your best stuff out, see where it falls apart, tighten it up, and try again. When I'm sparring with a black belt, I generally stick to my A game, the set of techniques that I feel confident in, because I need someone stronger than I am to help me improve them. While my matches with lower skilled players are perfect for experimentation and discovery. Things get a little more complicated for the stronger player in a match. When I'm the stronger player, I try to play the game in a way that keeps the other player feeling like things are close. I challenge them with a specific set of techniques that are adjusted for their level so they can practice working on beating them, not just mindlessly smashing them over and over with stuff they don't know how to deal with. And I do it in a way that lets me get something useful out of the match too, either by using stuff that's not in my A game quite yet, or playing from a suboptimal position so I can practice defense and recovery. By playing with a thoughtful handicap, I get to keep both of us in the zone of proximal development, and both of us get to feel like we're having a productive and fun session. If the weaker player starts to figure me out, then they've earned the right to see some of my A game, and I get to turn it up on them. In these sessions, the weaker player is usually just doing whatever they can do to survive and scrap for wins, while the stronger player actually has far more work to do, because they need to continuously assess the weaker player's state and adjust their gameplay on the fly as they learn more about where the weaker player can be gradually nudged into playing better, while also making sure to guide the match into places where they can work on the thing they're trying to practice. For example, when I'm playing weaker players in my stream sessions, I'll usually check for some specific chip matchup familiarity points. Do you press buttons after blocking Gamma Blade? Do you react to Leaf Grab? Do you ever use Blitz on left-right mix-ups? If the player shows me that they're comfortable with this stuff, then I'll work on playing around these moments, keeping track of their recent decisions, and cycling through options to see how they change things up as the set goes on. If they show that they don't know that much about the matchup, then I'll tell them about these details, and I'll switch to practice more generic strike-throw mix-ups and frame traps, and focus on identifying their defensive patterns, their air-teching, bursting, reversals, and so on. In these sets, my goal is usually to remove knowledge checks from the play session, give them the information they need to play the next session better, and guide the match to work on stuff that most of us can benefit from. This may sound like the stronger player is doing the weaker player a lot of favors, but this is actually how a stronger player can make imbalanced matches useful and enjoyable for both players, and that is a valuable skill to sharpen. By learning how to consciously modulate your play in response to your opponent's weaknesses, you will learn how to develop a stronger sense for identifying them. And that is some of the most useful competitive practice you can get against players of any skill level. You'll also be able to use your game practice to help shape someone else learn their own game practice, and that ends up being an even cooler experience than any game you could actually get good at. Thanks for listening.